The dust of the Zargos corridor tasted of rust and regret. It coated everything in a fine, ochre film. The stacked HESCO barriers, the drooping camouflage netting, the weary faces of the soldiers who called forward operating base Kestrel home. Into this crucible of grit and tension walked Anya Petrova. She moved with a quiet economy that seemed out of place, her posture straight, her gaze calm and absorbing the controlled chaos around her. She was 52, though the lines around her eyes spoke of more years than that, etched not by age but by horizons and hardships. Her fatigues were clean, crisply creased, a stark contrast to the sweat-stained, sun-bleached uniforms of the men stationed here. She carried a single, deceptively light pack and a hardened rifle case. Her presence was an anomaly, a disruption in the base's harsh rhythm. The soldiers of Viper Team, an elite long-range reconnaissance platoon, stopped their weapons maintenance as she passed. Their hands, slick with gun oil and calloused from use, went still. Whispers followed her like a trail of spent casings. "Who's the tourist?" one of them muttered, a private named Garcia with more bravado than sense. "Intel says she's a consultant," another replied, his voice laced with skepticism. "Some high-level analyst from command." Lieutenant Caden Reeve, Viper Team's commander, watched her approach the command tent. He was young, forged in simulations and convinced of his own tactical genius. He saw a woman who could be his mother, a civilian in military clothing, and his lip curled into a barely perceptible sneer. To him, she was a liability before she'd even spoken a word. "A consultant," he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "They send us a librarian to help us hunt wolves." His platoon sergeant, Marcus Thorne, a thick-necked veteran of a dozen lesser conflicts, grunted in agreement. "Look at her, sir. Probably here to brief us on cultural sensitivity before getting choppered back to a five-star hotel. Waste of resources." Anya heard them. She heard everything. The acoustics of a desert FOB, with its hard-packed earth and metal containers, carried sound with startling clarity. She chose not to acknowledge it. Acknowledgement would be an engagement, and she did not engage without purpose. She stepped into the dim, air-conditioned chill of the command tent, her eyes adjusting from the brutal glare outside. Colonel Jensen sat behind a folding table cluttered with laptops and topographical maps. He was a man worn down by the constant pressure of command in a forgotten war. His gaze was sharp, assessing. He looked at the paperwork on his screen, then at the woman standing before him. The file was a joke, more blacked-out redactions than actual text. It listed her name, age, and a single line, "External Advisor, Tactical Overwatch." It was signed by a general whose name Jensen hadn't seen in a decade. "Ms. Petrova," he said, his voice flat. He didn't offer a seat. "Welcome to Kestrel. Your clearance is verified, but your purpose is vague." "My purpose is to provide support as needed, Colonel," Anya replied. Her voice was steady, low, with a faint, unplaceable accent. Reeve and Thorne had followed her in, ostensibly to deliver their patrol readiness report, but really to gawk at the new arrival. Reeve stood with his arms crossed, projecting an aura of impatient competence. "The support we need is kinetic, ma'am," Reeve interjected, stepping forward. He didn't bother to hide his contempt. "We need trigger pullers, not policy analysts." Anya's gaze shifted to him. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out gray, like a winter sky. They held his for a moment, unblinking. There was no anger in them, no defensiveness. There was just a profound, unnerving stillness. Reeve felt a flicker of discomfort, an unfamiliar sensation he quickly suppressed. "I understand," was all she said. Jensen sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had real problems to deal with, insurgent movements in the northern passes, supply lines stretched thin, and now a political appointee to babysit. "Find her a bunk in the annex, Sergeant Thorne. Get her squared away." He turned back to his maps, a clear dismissal. "And Ms. Petrova, stay out of the way. The men have work to do." Thorne led her out of the tent. "Annex is this way, ma'am," he said, his tone grudgingly formal. The soldiers of Viper Team watched as she was led toward the transient quarters, a row of shipping containers converted into cramped living spaces. The laughter started as soon as the container door closed behind her. Inside, Anya methodically unpacked. Her kit was sparse. A set of spare clothes, a small data slate, and a compact medkit. Then she opened the rifle case. It wasn't a standard-issue M110 or a flashy new Barrett. It was an older model, a heavily modified bolt-action rifle. Its stock was worn smooth in places, the metal of the receiver bearing the faint scars of countless field strip-downs. It was a relic, but it was immaculate. She began the ritual of cleaning it, a process she'd performed thousands of times. Her movements were precise, efficient, a form of meditation. Thorne walked past her open door a few minutes later and stopped, leaning against the frame. He watched her work the cleaning rod down the barrel, her focus absolute. He saw the rifle, a museum piece, in his eyes. He scoffed, turning to Garcia, who had followed him. "Get a load of this. She's got Grandpa's hunting rifle." He raised his voice, loud enough for her to hear clearly. "Practicing your marksmanship, ma'am? You remind me of one of those old war stories. The kind the old-timers tell around a fire." He paused for effect. "Bet she tells people back home she's Ghost Viper." The name hung in the dry air. Ghost Viper. It was a legend, a myth from the brutal, asymmetric wars of the previous generation. A shadow operator, presumed to be a sniper, credited with over 200 confirmed kills in the infamous Battle of the Grey Valley. An operative who could infiltrate anywhere, strike from impossible distances, and vanish without a trace. The name was a ghost story whispered by recruits, a benchmark of lethality that no real soldier could ever hope to achieve. Garcia and the other young soldiers snickered. The joke was perfect. This quiet, older woman, so out of place in their world of hard edges and high-tech warfare, playing at being the deadliest ghost in their mythology. Anya Petrova didn't look up from her rifle. She simply slid the bolt back into the receiver. The click it made as it locked into place was the only sound she made in response. It was sharp, definitive, and utterly final. Her silence was not shame. It was patience. The next morning, the dismissal solidified from casual mockery into operational policy. Colonel Jensen held his morning briefing in the command tent, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. A high-value target, an insurgent commander known only as the Architect, was believed to be meeting with his lieutenants in a network of ruins in the foothills of the Tor Cattle Range. Viper Team was tasked with a long-range reconnaissance patrol to confirm his presence and paint the target for an airstrike. "This is a ghost hunt, people," Jensen said, pointing to a satellite image on the screen. "Intel is thin. We believe the Architect will be at this location within the next 48 hours. Reeve, your team goes in, sets up an OP, and confirms ID. No engagement unless compromised. In and out, clean and quiet." "We'll get it done, sir," Reeve said, his jaw set with confidence. His men, arrayed behind him, nodded in unison. They were coiled springs of muscle and training, eager for the mission. Anya stood at the back of the tent, observing. She hadn't been invited, but she hadn't been told to leave either. Jensen noticed her presence and his brow furrowed in irritation. He saw her as an unwelcome distraction, a civilian observer in a classified military briefing. After outlining the insertion plan and extraction contingencies, he turned his attention directly to her. His voice was loud, intended for everyone in the tent to hear. "Ms. Petrova, your role in this operation will be to remain here at the FOB. You will be assigned to the comms tent. You can monitor the feeds." It was a blatant sidelining. Assigning a tactical Overwatch advisor to simply watch screens that trained technicians were already monitoring was a profound insult. It was a message. You are not one of us. You are not useful. You are a burden. Reeve smirked openly. Thorne shook his head, a look of pitying condescension on his face. The message was received by everyone. The librarian was being sent to the library. Anya met the colonel's gaze. "Understood, Colonel," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Good," Jensen grunted, turning back to his maps. Viper team, final gear check in 30. Wheels up at 0-500 inch. As the team filed out to prepare, Thorne paused beside Anya. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "We'll be careful. You just make sure the coffee stays hot for us back here." He clapped her lightly on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing dominance, before jogging to catch up with his team. Anya watched them go, her expression unreadable. She walked to the comms tent, a cramped, humming space filled with the glow of monitors and the quiet murmur of radio chatter. The senior comms tech, a young sergeant named Elias Vance, looked up as she entered. He'd heard the scuttlebutt. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing to a spare chair in the corner. "Colonel said you'd be joining us. The main tactical feed is on that screen there. Let me know if you need anything." He was polite but distant. She was an outsider. For the next several hours, Anya sat in that chair. She didn't touch the controls. She didn't ask questions. She simply watched and listened. She observed the flow of information, the call signs, the frequencies, the subtle rhythms of the base's electronic nervous system. Vance and his team initially watched her with wary curiosity, but as the hours passed and she remained perfectly still, a silent fixture in the corner, they began to forget she was even there. She watched Viper Team's icons move across the digital map as they were airlifted to their drop-off point. She listened to their crisp, professional comms checks as they began their long, silent trek toward the objective. The sun climbed, beating down on the FOB, and the day settled into a tense, watchful routine. Late in the afternoon, Reeves' voice crackled over the speakers. "Kestrel Command, this is Viper 1. We are in position, establishing OP Alpha. We have eyes on the target location. No activity to report. Over." "Solid copy, Viper 1." The radio operator responded. "Maintain observation. Report any change in status." "Over." The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Inside the command tent, Jensen allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Reeve was arrogant, but he was competent. In the comms tent, Vance gave Anya a nod. "Looks like a quiet day, ma'am." Anya didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on a secondary screen, one displaying atmospheric and electronic spectrum analysis. A faint, almost imperceptible anomaly had appeared on the waterfall display. A flicker in the background noise, a ghost in the machine. It was nothing the automated systems would flag, just a tiny deviation from the baseline. To the technicians, it was meaningless static. To Anya, it was a whisper of a threat. It was the sound of a predator gathering in the shadows. She leaned forward, her stillness finally broken, her gray eyes narrowing in absolute focus. The dismissal had placed her exactly where she needed to be, in the one place where the first sign of disaster would appear. The crisis began not with a bang, but with a hiss. A wave of broad-spectrum static washed over the comms, swallowing Viper Team's channel in an instant. The tactical display showing their biometric data and locations blinked red, then went gray. Signal lost. "Viper 1, this is Kestrel Command. Radio check. Over," the operator said, his voice tight. Only static answered. "Try the secondary channel." Jensen's voice boomed over the tense internal comm. "Get them back." Vance's fingers flew across his console. "Negative, sir. Secondary is jammed. Tertiary too. It's a full-spectrum electronic attack. Military grade. This isn't your standard insurgent junk." Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle the edges of the command tent's professional comm. Jensen stormed into the comms hub, his face a thunderous mask. "What do we have? Get me a visual. Launch the Sky Eye drone." "Drone is unresponsive, Colonel," a tech shouted back. "They're jamming the control link." They were blind, deaf, and helpless. 12 men, deep in hostile territory, had just vanished from the grid. The air in the tent grew thick and suffocating. The young technicians, who had been confident and relaxed moments before, now worked with a frantic, desperate energy, their faces pale in the glow of their screens. They ran diagnostics, rebooted systems, and rerouted frequencies, but it was like trying to shout in a hurricane. The jamming was a solid wall, sophisticated and impenetrable. Jensen slammed his fist on a console. Damn it! The architect knew. He lured them in. It's a trap. He stared at the blank map where Viper Team's icons should have been. Sending a quick reaction force now would be suicide. They had no idea what they were flying into, the enemy's numbers, their positions, their capabilities. They would be sending more men into the same meat grinder. In her corner, Anya Petrova stood up. The movement was so deliberate and calm that it cut through the rising hysteria. Every head turned toward her. "Give me a portable SATCOM unit and a high-power spotter scope," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Vance stared at her, bewildered. "Ma'am, we can't get a signal out with the main relay array. A portable unit won't do anything. The jamming isn't a solid wall," Anya stated, her eyes fixed on the spectrum analysis display that only she had been watching. "It's a complex waveform, designed to overwhelm standard military transceivers. But it has to cycle. There are microsecond gaps in the harmonic frequency. Your equipment is designed for bandwidth, not speed. It's too slow to find the window." "I'm not." Her technical jargon, spoken with such certainty, stunned the room into silence. Jensen looked at her, his initial instinct to dismiss her warring with the desperate hope that she might actually know something. He saw not a librarian, but a predator who had been watching, waiting, analyzing. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Anya didn't waste time explaining the theory. She was already moving. She strode to the supply locker, grabbing a battered-looking comms pack and a long, powerful spotting scope. "Get me a direct feed from the main antenna's raw signal processor. And I need the encryption key for Viper Team's emergency beacon." "That's a single-use, line-of-sight laser comm," Vance protested. "It's useless without a direct." "Just do it," Jensen barked, making a snap decision. Desperation had made him receptive. He pointed at Vance. "Give her whatever she asks for." Anya slung the gear over her shoulder and headed for the tent flap, moving with a fluid grace that belied her age. Her steps were sure, her purpose clear. She was heading for the tallest point on the base, a rickety, skeletal observation tower on the western perimeter, used mostly by bored sentries to scan the empty horizon. The soldiers on the perimeter wall watched in confusion as the woman they'd nicknamed the librarian began to ascend the tower's ladder. The wind whipped at her, threatening to tear her from the rungs, but she climbed with the steady, practiced rhythm of someone intimately familiar with heights and exposure. She didn't hesitate, didn't look down. She moved like she belonged there. At the top, on a small metal platform that swayed in the wind, she set up her equipment. She didn't try to transmit. She didn't try to hail Viper Team. She jacked a cable from her portable unit into the raw feed Jensen had ordered, bypassing the FOB's overwhelmed processors. Then she put an earpiece in, closed her eyes, and listened. The others heard only static. She heard a symphony of chaos. She filtered out the powerful jamming signal, focusing on the faint, distorted sounds buried beneath it. The rhythmic thump of a heavy machine gun. The sharp, distinct crack of a Dragunov sniper rifle. The cough of a mortar tube. She correlated the sounds with the wind direction and the faint echoes bouncing off the distant rock faces. Then she raised the spotter scope to her eye, bracing it against the tower's railing. Her hands were rock-steady. She scanned the distant ridgeline, a hazy, shimmering line miles away. To anyone else, it was an undifferentiated mass of rock and shadow. To her, it was a grid. Her eyes, honed by decades of practice, picked out the infinitesimal details. A puff of dust that didn't match the wind pattern. A muzzle blast. A flicker of movement in a shadowed alcove. A fighter changing position. A glint of light off glass. An enemy spotter. She was miles from the battle, yet she could see it with more clarity than the men trapped inside it. She was reconstructing the entire engagement from sound, shadow, and dust. Meanwhile, on that ridge, Reeve and his team were fighting for their lives. They were pinned down in a rocky depression, raked by machine gun fire from a fortified position above them. A sniper was picking them off one by one. They'd already lost 2 men, and Thorn had taken shrapnel to his arm. Their comms were dead. They were cut off, outnumbered, and systematically being torn apart. "We have to pull back," Garcia yelled over the din. "Pull back to where?" Reeve shouted back, firing a burst from his rifle. "We're boxed in. They knew our exact route." Despair was starting to set in. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the bitter taste of fear. Suddenly, Sergeant Thorne's wrist-mounted GPS unit, a device they all wore, buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a text alert from the emergency laser comm beacon, a system they hadn't even activated. The message was a string of characters, impossibly transmitted through the wall of jamming. "MG Nest, 30M up, 2 o'clock, cave mouth." Reeve stared at the message. "What the hell is that? Whose signal?" "I don't know, sir," Thorne grunted, clutching his bleeding arm. "But that's where the heavy fire is coming from." They were desperate. Reeve made a choice. "Garcia, you and Jones, suppress that cave. Now!" The two soldiers laid down a heavy volume of fire on the cave mouth indicated in the message. The enemy machine gun sputtered and fell silent. It was a small victory, but it was a lifeline. Another message buzzed on Thorne's wrist. "Sniper, ruined hut, 11 o'clock, upper window." Reeve immediately redirected his grenadier. A single 40mm round arced through the air and detonated in the window of the distant ruin. The deadly, precise sniper fire that had been plaguing them stopped. Anya worked from her perch, a conductor orchestrating a distant orchestra of violence. She wasn't just observing. She was commanding. Her fingers flew across the keypad of her comms unit, translating her visual and auditory intelligence into short, clear, tactical data bursts. She was using a deprecated, highly compressed transmission protocol, a digital ghost that slipped through the cracks in the enemy's electronic warfare. Each message was a tiny packet of information, timed to perfection, riding the brief null cycle in the jamming wave. It was a technique that required impossible timing and a deep, intuitive understanding of signal propagation. It was a forgotten art. Mortar team, SW Gully. Behind rock outcrop. Prepping. 3-man team flanking. West. Low ground. V infantry concentration. Wadi. 200 m south. The messages kept coming. A steady stream of pure, life-saving intelligence. Reeve and his men, trapped and moments from being overrun, were now fighting with the omniscience of a god. They knew the enemy's every move before it happened. They shifted from a desperate defense to a brutally efficient counterattack. They engaged the flanking team. They called in their own mortar fire on the enemy's position in the gully. They set up a kill zone for the infantry advancing through the wadi. The enemy, who had held every advantage, was now completely bewildered. Their ambush had been perfect, their technological superiority absolute. Yet the trapped American unit was fighting as if they had a satellite hovering directly overhead, calling out every single target. Their command and control fell apart as they were hit from unexpected angles with lethal precision. The momentum of the battle shifted violently. Back at the FOB, Jensen and the comms team could only watch in baffled silence. On the raw signal feed, they could see the tiny, almost invisible data spikes that Anya was sending. They were too small, too fast for their systems to even register as a communication. "Who is she?" Vance whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jensen didn't answer. He was watching the tower through a pair of binoculars. He saw the lone figure on the platform, unmoving except for the slight adjustments of the scope, a statue against the violent sky. She wasn't an advisor. She was a weapon, and he had sent her to make coffee. With the primary threats neutralized and the enemy force in disarray, the jamming signal began to falter. A voice, strained and breathless, finally broke through the static on the command frequency. "Kestrel Command, this is Viper 1. We are holding. Ambush broken. Requesting immediate evac for casualties. Over." A wave of relief washed through the command tent. Jensen grabbed the mic. "Solid copy. Viper 1. QRF is wheels up in 2 minutes. We're coming to get you." With the intelligence Anya had provided, Jensen now knew exactly where the remaining enemy pockets were. He could launch the quick reaction force not into a blind trap, but with precise targeting data. The rescue helicopters, bristling with rockets and guns, lifted off into the dusk, their flight path guided by the information sent by the quiet woman in the tower. The extraction was swift and brutally effective. Viper team was pulled out of the fire, leaving behind a shattered and confused enemy force. They returned to Kestrel not in triumph, but in a state of shock and awe. They had been to the brink of annihilation and had been pulled back by a ghostly, unseen hand. In the med tent, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by pain and questions. Reeve, his face streaked with grime and cordite, was being debriefed by a stunned Colonel Jensen. "I don't understand, sir," Reeve said, his voice hoarse. "Someone was feeding us intel. Perfect intel. It wasn't coming from you." "We know, Lieutenant," Jensen replied, his expression grim. "The transmissions originated from inside this FOB." Thorne, sitting on a cot while a medic stitched the gash in his arm, looked up. The messages. They were tagged with an alphanumeric signature. Just 2 letters. GV. The comms tech, Vance, who had come to the debrief, shook his head. "That's not a recognized call sign in this theater, sir. I've never seen it." The pieces began to click into place in Thorne's mind. The quiet woman, the old rifle, the condescending joke he'd made, a joke that now felt like a sacrilege. His face went pale beneath the dirt. "GV," he whispered, the sound barely audible. He looked from Reeve to Jensen, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. Ghost. Viper. The name dropped into the sterile quiet of the med tent like a live grenade. Reeve stared at him, confused. Jensen's eyes narrowed, the legendary name connecting with the impossible events of the day. At that moment, Anya Petrova walked into the command tent. The QRF was back, the wounded were being treated, and the immediate crisis was over. She had descended the tower and returned to the comms hub to retrieve her pack. She was just a quiet woman in clean fatigues again, an island of calm in the bustling aftermath. She was wiping the lens of her spotter scope with a soft cloth, her movements as meticulous as ever. Jensen, Reeve, and Thorne left the med tent and strode purposefully toward her. They stopped in front of her, a phalanx of authority and disbelief. "Ms. Petrova," Jensen began, his voice tight, formal. "I need an explanation. Now, who are you?" Anya stopped cleaning the lens. She looked up, her placid gray eyes meeting his. She didn't speak. "The call sign," Reeve pressed, stepping forward. "The one that saved my team. GV. What does it stand for?" It was Thorne who answered, his voice trembling slightly. He was staring at her, at the quiet competence that he had so arrogantly mistaken for weakness. He looked at the woman who had single-handedly turned the tide of a battle from 5 miles away, using nothing but a scope, an old radio, and a forgotten skill. "It stands for Ghost Viper," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Anya's expression didn't change. She met their stares, a silent confirmation. Then, slowly, deliberately, she set her lens cloth down. She reached up with her right hand and rolled up the sleeve of her left forearm. There, on the sun-weathered skin, was a tattoo. It was old, the lines faded, but the image was unmistakable. A coiled viper, its fangs bared, its tail dissolving into a wisp of smoke. It was the unit insignia of the legendary, long-disbanded intelligence group, Task Force 11, whose most feared operative was known only by a single call sign. The command tent, already quiet, fell into a profound, echoing silence. The whir of computer fans and the distant shouts from the flight line seemed to fade into nothingness. Jensen, Reeve, Thorne, every soldier and technician who saw the tattoo, froze. Their minds struggled to reconcile the image before them. The middle-aged consultant, the librarian they had mocked, bore the mark of the deadliest ghost in their institutional memory. The campfire story was real, and they had told her to stay out of the way. The shift in the atmosphere was as sudden and total as the jamming that had crippled Viper Team. It was a physical change, a drop in pressure, a realignment of the entire social order of the base. The arrogance, the skepticism, the casual cruelty, it all evaporated, replaced by a stunned, bottomless silence. The men who had smirked at her now couldn't meet her gaze. They looked at the floor, at the walls, at anything but the living legend they had so casually disrespected. Sergeant Thorne was hit the hardest. His earlier words, the joke about Ghost Viper, replayed in his head, each syllable a fresh lash of shame. He had stood in front of a giant and mocked her for her shadow. He felt a hot flush creep up his neck, a profound mortification that left him speechless. He looked at his bandaged arm, a wound he would have died with were it not for her, and felt a debt so immense he knew he could never repay it. Lieutenant Reeve, the cocky platoon leader, stood ramrod straight, as if on parade. His entire worldview, built on a foundation of his own perceived excellence, had been shattered. He had led his men into a perfectly executed trap. He had failed. He had been saved by the very person he had deemed incompetent, a woman who had demonstrated a level of tactical awareness he couldn't begin to comprehend. His pride was a casualty of the day's events, and in its place, a raw, humbling respect was being born. Colonel Jensen was the first to break the silence. He cleared his throat, and the sound was like a rock falling into a still lake. He looked at Anya, not as a subordinate or a consultant, but as an equal, perhaps even a superior. "Ms. Petrova," he began, his voice rough with emotion. He stopped, corrected himself. "Anya, there are no words. Your file. It was a ghost. We had no idea." He wasn't just apologizing for his own behavior. He was apologizing on behalf of the entire institution that had forgotten its heroes. "I am sorry." Anya simply pulled her sleeve back down, covering the mark. The reveal was over. She had no interest in basking in their shock. She looked past Jensen, her gaze falling on Reeve and Thorne. "Your men fought well," she said, her voice calm and even. "They were disciplined. They listened to the intel and executed. You should be proud of them." The grace of her words was a final, devastating blow to their arrogance. She didn't say, "I saved you." She said, "Your men did well." She deflected the credit, placing it back onto the soldiers she had guided from the brink. In that single moment, she taught them more about leadership than they had learned in all their years of training. The respect they felt for her deepened into something akin to reverence. The story of what happened, the ambush, the ghost signal, the tattoo, spread through the FOB like wildfire. It wasn't shouted from the rooftops. It was whispered in huddled groups in the Chow Hall, in the hushed confines of the barracks. The soldiers who had laughed at Garcia's jokes now fell silent whenever Anya passed. Their posture would straighten. Their eyes would follow her with a mixture of fear and awe. The nickname librarian was expunged from the base's lexicon, replaced by a name spoken only in hushed, respectful tones. Ghost Viper. Later that evening, Reeve found her near the perimeter fence. She was watching the last light fade from the peaks of the Tor cattle range. He walked up to her, stopping a respectful distance away. He held his own rifle, his prized, custom-built weapon. He had spent hours stripping it down, cleaning every component until it gleamed, oiling the action until it was silent and smooth. He held it out to her, offering it stock first. It was a gesture that transcended words, a soldier's highest form of tribute. An offering of one's own weapon is an admission of another's superior skill, a sign of ultimate trust and respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its earlier bravado. I wanted you to see it, to know that. We understand. Thank you." Anya looked at the rifle, then at the young lieutenant's earnest, humbled face. She didn't take the weapon. She simply reached out and placed her hand on the receiver for a moment, a gesture of acknowledgement and acceptance. "It's a fine weapon, Lieutenant," she said. "Take care of your team." She then turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the weight of his rifle feeling profoundly different in his hands. It was no longer just a tool of his trade. It was a symbol of a lesson he would never forget. The respect she had earned was absolute, forged not in a hail of bullets, but in the quiet, undeniable display of pure, unassailable competence. Night fell completely, blanketing FOB Kestrel in a cold, star-dusted darkness. The immediate aftermath of the battle had subsided. The wounded were stable, the dead were being prepared for their final journey home, and a somber quiet had settled over the men of Viper Team. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind the heavy weight of grief and the sharp, startling clarity of their near-miss with oblivion. Anya Petrova returned to the place where she had turned the tide. She climbed the ladder of the observation tower, the metal cold beneath her hands. The wind at the top was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of distant, unseen snow. It was a lonely place, a perch suspended between the raw earth and the infinite sky. She wasn't there to watch for enemies anymore. Her vigil was of a different kind. She leaned against the railing, the same spot where she had braced her scope, and looked out not toward the battlefield, but east, toward a horizon that was still a deep, impenetrable black. From a pocket in her fatigues, she pulled a small, worn notebook bound in dark leather. Its edges were soft with use, the cover scarred and faded. She opened it to a fresh page. Using a simple pen, she wrote a single entry in neat, precise script. It wasn't a tactical report or an after-action review. It was a name, Corporal David Chin. He was the second man Viper Team had lost, the one taken by the sniper before she could intervene. It was a name she had learned from the casualty reports. She closed the book, the simple act a private, solemn ritual. She did not celebrate victories. She mourned the costs. Each name in the book was a weight she chose to carry, a silent promise that the fallen would not be forgotten, at least by her. She stood there for a long time, a solitary silhouette against the cosmos. The base below was a small cluster of muted lights, an island of human endeavor in a vast, indifferent wilderness. She was a guardian, a ghost, keeping a watch that no one had assigned her. A faint metallic sound from below broke her reverie. The scrape of a boot on the ladder. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew who it was. Sergeant Marcus Thorne climbed slowly, his movements hampered by the sling supporting his arm. He ascended with a quiet reverence, as if climbing the steps to a temple. He hadn't come to talk or to apologize again. Words felt cheap, inadequate for the gratitude and shame that warred within him. He felt an undeniable compulsion to simply be there, to bear witness. He stopped a few rungs from the top of the ladder, his head just clearing the level of the platform. He could see her outline clearly now. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the unseen horizon. He didn't intrude on her space. He just stayed there on the ladder exposed to the wind. He was a sentry, standing guard over the woman who had guarded them all. It was a complete reversal of their roles. He was the protector now, offering his presence as the only tribute he had left to give. They remained that way for what felt like hours, two silent figures locked in a tableau of unspoken understanding. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the hard-earned respect that had been paid for in blood and terror on a distant ridge. He knew she was aware of his presence. She knew why he was there. Nothing needed to be said. Finally, the first hint of change appeared in the east. A faint, gray line began to separate the sky from the jagged teeth of the mountains. The darkness began to soften, yielding to the promise of dawn. Anya closed her eyes for a moment, as if feeling the first photons of the new day on her skin. She slid her leather-bound journal back into her pocket. Her vigil was over. She turned, and for the first time, her eyes met Thorne's. There was no judgment in her gaze, no lingering resentment. There was only a quiet acknowledgement. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then she began her descent. She passed him on the ladder, the space between them so small he could feel the faint warmth she radiated. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. The moment required no language. Thorne remained on the ladder, watching her walk across the compound until she disappeared into the shadows of the annex. He then pulled himself fully onto the platform and took her place at the railing. He watched the sun rise over the mountains she had commanded, the light spilling into the valley and illuminating the harsh, beautiful landscape where he and his men had almost died. He understood now. True strength wasn't about youth or arrogance or the latest technology. It was about seeing what others could not, doing what others would not, and carrying the weight of it all in silence. He was watching the dawn, but he was really seeing her. The ghost, the legend, the quiet woman who had reminded them all what a true soldier was.